Hey, what is up? It is Rob from Crypto Bobby, and today I want to talk to you specifically about living life right now in a post-China ICO ban world and what that means for a lot of us moving forward from an investment perspective, what I'm keeping an eye on moving forward, and also with the big drop in price from the past few days, where I'm looking to potentially invest additional funds in, because I think while the China ICO ban is generally bad news for cryptocurrency, I don't think as many cryptocurrencies are as affected or affected at all as their price indicates. So that's what I want to talk about today. My name is Rob from Crypto Bobby. If you're new here, definitely hit the subscribe button. Or if you're listening on the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, leave a review on iTunes. But let's get into it today. So yesterday, unless you were living under a rock, news came out that China has officially banned ICOs. There was a nice little article on CoinDesk with a full translation. But essentially what happened is China came out and said that the process of token fundraising activities within China is illegal. It is bad for the economy. It's bad for financial stability. They basically said they understand what ICOs are, and then they also essentially said any organization or individuals participating in ICOs that is illegal and is subject to relevant law enforcement investigations, and they will be, you can see here, severely punished for people who refuse to halt fundraising activities through ICO. So overall, definitely not worth, at least from this information, definitely not worth participating in an ICO if you are in China anymore. And that news came out and just dropped the heck out of almost all of cryptocurrency, tokens, whether it was Bitcoin, whether it was Ethereum, which particularly got slammed. Basically everything was down between 5, 10, 15+%, with some of the leaders in getting crushed. Number one would be Neo, and then additionally Qtum as well. Two cryptocurrencies that have had incredible rises in the past few months, really kind of on the back of the premise of having a really strong relationship with China. If we look here on the 7-day, Neo has gotten worked pretty good, being up from $30, $35, $36 all the way down to at one point $17, and now is kind of settled a little bit above $20. So Neo has gotten worked pretty good in the past couple days with this news, as has Qtum going from one of the first Ethereum unicorns being worth over $1 billion now to being back below $700 million. So both Neo and Qtum were kind of some of the big losers from yesterday, just due to a lot of the, I guess, perceived relationship that they have with China, and how the potential ICO ban, or really the full-on ICO ban now, is affecting that. But outside of Neo and outside of Qtum, what I'm looking at today is, like I said, overall I don't think that this is great news for the cryptocurrency market, but at the same time, China tends to ban a lot of things. There isn't a lot that China does not ban. So, to that effect, this is somewhat to be, in my opinion, to be expected. I think it came pretty quickly. The rumors came out about a week ago that China was considering regulations surrounding ICOs, and then they just came out and said, hey, no, we're going to full out ban this. But when it comes down to it, there are so many cryptocurrencies here that have nothing to do with ICOs in China that are getting hammered and are trading right now pretty much at a discount. So whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum obviously has a lot to do with ICOs in China. It wasn't the ICO platform of China, like sometimes people advertise Neo, even if Neo didn't necessarily advertise themselves as that. But almost every cryptocurrency has been affected by this. So what I'm looking at now is that what got affected by this news of an ICO ban, and what shouldn't have been affected from a price standpoint. Should Bitcoin have dropped 5% or so on the news that China was banning ICOs, when there really aren't ICOs on crypto, or when there really aren't ICOs run on Bitcoin? Does that really make too much of a difference? Probably not, in my opinion. Should something like Ethereum go down from its highs of close to $400 2 days ago to down 25+% in 2 days. Probably not, in my opinion. So I'm looking at this now, and one of the things that I've kind of come to terms with in a little bit is, and a story that I actually heard when I was reading the book Digital Gold fairly recently, but basically when the kind of reminds me a little bit of this, but when the Silk Road news came out that basically the FBI and the US government had shut down Silk Road, and this was a number of years ago, where Silk Road was perceived to be the big driver of Bitcoin, where it only turned out that Silk Road was about 4% of Bitcoin transactions. And when the news that Silk Road had gotten busted by the FBI and there was a ton of uncertainty in the market and people thought, wow, like this is going to be really bad news. All the transaction volume is going to go down, things like that. There was a story in Digital Gold where the Winklevoss twins, the price of Bitcoin went from being worth like $150 on the news that right before the news of Silk Road to being worth about $115 to $110 on within about 2 or 3 hours of that news coming out. And they looked at the news and basically said, okay, Silk Road has come out. Basically, this information about Silk Road has come out. Silk Road was, somewhat of like a black eye on the name of Bitcoin at least a few years ago. It's only accounting for 4% of transaction volumes, but meanwhile the price is down, 20+%. This is actually a buying opportunity. We're going to buy as much as we possibly can at that 110, 115 range, and then continue to try to deploy our capital that we have waiting for a move like this, because while this isn't great news for the space, it doesn't deserve to be down this much. And that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. China bans basically everything. I saw a story today actually that somebody went to jail for producing. Somebody went to jail in China recently for creating and selling VPN software. So there's a lot of regulation, there's a lot of restriction around around the internet in China and the movement of money in China. And this to me is, we probably should have expected this. And if you didn't expect it, you might have been a little bit, silly for not expecting it. But overall, I don't necessarily think that the impact that it's had on the cryptocurrency price is justified on all levels. Maybe something like Neo and Qtum and some of these other cryptocurrencies that have a focus on China, or something like that. Maybe that is more justifiable than something like Bitcoin, but I'm trying to kind of calculate in my head where and when this type of movement is justified, and where that I can take the most advantage of this price dropping when I don't necessarily think that it's fully justifiable in all cases. So what am I looking at right now? Well, a few different things. Number one, I'm taking a look at Bitcoin, Ethereum, OMG, and then the privacy coins as well. So, what do I mean by that? Well, number one, Bitcoin, has had a nice drop from it a few days ago, really, when it pushed up against 5,000 and got shut down, and it is now below 4,500. I'm looking at Bitcoin as a potential place to continue to invest. That's likely what I'm going to do. I put a little bit additional in Bitcoin last evening. I feel fairly comfortable with that. Ethereum as well is another place where I am going to continue to invest. I think kind of like Bitcoin, instead of being pushed up against 5,000, Bitcoin was pushing up against 400 and got slammed down and has been on a downward trend the past couple of days. And then especially with the news about these China ICOs, basically it was down $50 from 350 all the way below, at certain points to the 290 range, and is now above 315. So I put in a little bit of investment around $300. I feel fairly confident in that, and I think Ethereum, while the news of ICO regulation isn't necessarily great for something like Ethereum, where a lot of the usefulness of Ethereum kind of can be drawn to ICOs, but there are issues with ICOs on the Ethereum platform. If you have a massive ICO like a Status or like a 10x or whatever it is, that creates a big transaction backlog, and that might reduce some things as well. So that'll be interesting to see from Ethereum's perspective. But I still think right now Ethereum is at a bargain for where I still think Ethereum is at a bargain and that it doesn't necessarily deserve to be down as much as it is right now. So I invested a bit in Ethereum last evening, and I feel pretty confident in that as well. And one thing I'll state to that point too, regarding Ethereum and regarding regulation with China is that I saw some information, or it was a little bit in the Canadian regulatory release about there was something where I talked about fairly recently, about a week or so ago, and Canada, similar to the U.S., United States Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, came out and said some tokens may or may not be securities which would be regulated. Canada essentially said the same thing, but I think that Canada also opened up a sandbox program for these crypto, or for these blockchain digital asset companies, whatever you want to call them, virtual currency companies, to operate in this sandbox environment so Canada can learn more about regulation. I think some countries might, while regulation is going to increase, I think it's going to continue to increase for the foreseeable future. I think China banning ICOs might actually have a positive effect in some cases on certain companies, potentially like the US and potentially like Canada, where they might view that as an opportunity to be the innovators in the space. If China is completely shutting down ICOs and basically saying we're going to report anybody to get arrested almost, or you're going to have to report to the proper, basically you're going to get in pretty deep trouble. This gives the opportunity to a country like the United States or to Canada or to Europe, where China might be kicking your ass in certain areas of the economy, but if the US can foster innovation, or China can foster innovation and come up with real regulations surrounding this, and not just outright banning it, it could give them a head up. And if this really is something that is as innovative and game-changing as we think it is, then that might be an opportunity. So I think some of these countries actually might look at China banning ICOs, and some countries might be like, all right, we're going to ban ICOs too. That's definitely a real possibility. But I think other countries might view this as a possibility of, okay, well, China just banned ICOs, so China's out of the picture. How can we be the financial technology, how can we be fintech innovators? How can we be these digital technology innovators where China's shutting down innovation? How can we foster that innovation so that we can take advantage of that in the future and have that type of innovation within our borders? And I think that's a real possibility as well. So I don't think it's all bad news there. I think that's just something you want to keep aware of. But going back to outside of Bitcoin, outside of Ethereum, which are obviously the two big ones in the space, I'm looking at OMG too as a place to, I have money in OMG. That is for certain right now. And OMG has taken a little bit of a hit. And I think this was, there was an incredible buying opportunity the other day if we're looking at OMG right now, where it went from $10 all the way down to $8 and change, and has since recovered nicely to around $9, close to $10. I think, for me personally, OMG is something that they've come out and really addressed some of the issues around this regulation. But when we're looking at it, OMG is a payment processor, and they're doing a lot of work around payment processing, innovation around digital payments. That doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, that shouldn't really be affected by the issues surrounding China ICOs. OMG isn't going to be an ICO platform per se. Now they're a payment system, they're a payment innovator. What does that have to do with the ICOs? Not really much of anything. So I'm looking at that as, hey, did that really deserve to take that big of a dip? Did it really deserve to take a 20% haircut? No, probably not in my opinion. And that's why I'm continuing to look at potentially even deploying more, because if it's held up decently here, that's an opportunity to buy in at somewhat of a discount from these tops, and continue to ride that wave up if that's there. So I'm looking at OMG as well. I'm already fairly heavily invested in OMG, quite frankly. So that's an additional kind of point of evaluation that I have there. And then outside of OMG, what I'm looking at is something like Monero too. I think that while Monero is definitely trading off its all-time highs, it had that really crazy rise this month back in late August, where it went from being worth about 40, chilling in the 40s to going up to 150 at a certain point in time, $150. and having a really, really nice rise, and is now settled in the 110, 115 type range right now. I think these privacy coins might continue to gain steam as more regulation comes into play. As more regulation happens, privacy coins, in my opinion, might be something that people continue to look at. Even if it's not for the utility of the privacy, I think from an investment purpose, people are going to be really interested in how privacy can be leveraged. Obviously, there's not a ton of, there's certain privacy aspects of Bitcoin. There's certain privacy aspects, at least with Ethereum, of ZK snarks getting implemented and things like that. But true privacy coins, I think, are going to be interesting to see how that could continue to work in the future. And that might be something where I'm not in on Monero right now, but at the discount of its all-time highs, that 150 down to 112 right now, I think that's pretty appealing for me personally. And I think, having some money invested in these privacy coins is going to be something that'll be an interesting play in the near future. So that's one thing that, as regulation continues, kind of living in that post-China ICO ban world, I'm looking at this and saying, is this an area where people are going to find value in the future? And I do think people are going to find value. Could Monero be the Bitcoin-esque version of a privacy coin? It basically is right now, being in the top 10. I mean, there are other privacy coins out there that are doing, that are trying to, implement similar work. There are other, whether it's something like Zcash or a lot of other things out there, there are other privacy coins for sure. I'm trying to evaluate what the best privacy coin for me right now really might be right now, whether it's Monero, whether it's Zcash, whether it's, some other ones that I'm evaluating. So I'll keep you guys in the loop on that. But just from my perspective, one thing that I think will be an interesting play moving forward, and I think this has been talked about by a few different people, and I've talked to a few different people about this as well, but one thing that I'm fairly interested in is seeing how privacy coins will potentially grow with the increased regulation, because, with China, there's rumors basically every day. Hong Kong came out today and said, ICOs might be securities, which is basically the exact same thing the US said, the exact same thing Canada said. So more and more people are going to start regulating, whether it's ICOs or these digital currencies, especially with the growth of the industry right now. So I think the privacy coins might be something that people will either look to whether it's skirting regulation and trying to get around certain things, or they're just investing because they think other people might try to skirt regulations with that. That's something that I think is going to be an interesting value proposition potentially in the future. And, I remain pretty positive on that. And I'm going to evaluate, which one might be the best, whether it's, Monero, the big dog in the space, or if there's some smaller ones that I've taken a look at recently that would also be a good fit for, for potential valuation as, for basically, a sub $100 million, sub $150 million privacy coin that might have the team and the talent and the technology in place to come close to a Monero and really provide those gains as well. But, overall, when I'm looking at things at this point in time, I think that, that the Chinese ICO ban isn't necessarily the best thing in the world. But the world isn't falling apart by any stretch. There's no need to, necessarily panic. And, when we come down to it, the market cap growth over the past, I've said it before and I'll say it again, the market cap growth over the past month, or the past 3 months really, has been pretty damn crazy. We're looking at the past 3 months going from $100 billion to, at one point, about $180 billion. A correction we're essentially due for a correction. It's not necessarily fun to open up Blockfolio or to look at the charts and see the price of your investment dropping. Especially if you're new to the game and you've bought at these highs, that sucks. If you're new to cryptocurrency, you bought at the highs, that sucks. But this is not the first time a correction has happened. This is not going to be the last time a correction has happened. And this might just be the start of a correction, or a greater correction. But if you continue to dollar cost average and make smart plays, and you really believe in this stuff in the long term, and think that, over the course of time, $178 billion isn't the biggest that cryptocurrency will ever be at, then I think you're in a fine place. Just zoom out on the charts and look to see where we've come from in the past, in the past couple of months, and it's pretty easy to see why there's been somewhat of a correction and how the China news isn't the end of the world. So keep things in perspective. Back in January of this year, cryptocurrency was sitting at a $18 million market cap, and we've gone up 10x to $180 million market cap. So, yeah, we've lost 15, there's been a $15 billion, $20 billion, close to really, $30 billion correction right now. But when it comes down to it, there's been a $30 billion correction off of an $80 billion gain in the past month. So you got to keep things in focus. You got to keep things in perspective as far as the overall market goes. I remain fairly positive. I'm going to continue to, as of this point in time, I'm not a big trader per se where I'm going to look to liquidate a lot of my investments. I'm going to continue to dollar cost average in. I'm completely fine. For me personally, mentally, I'm completely fine if the market goes down more. If I get the opportunity to buy in more, I'm just going to continue to look for value plays and places where cryptocurrencies that have been overly affected by things that don't necessarily correlate to its downward trend, like a Bitcoin having nothing to do with China ICOs, or OMG not really having much to do with China ICOs, or certain value propositions based around what regulation might have to do in the future, like privacy coins as well. If you have found this video helpful, I would really appreciate a subscribe. Again, my name is Rob from Crypto Bobby. So hit me up with a subscribe. Definitely like the video below, or provide any thoughts, comments that you have. Really appreciate the time. Thank you so much for joining me here today, and I hope you have a great day, whether you are buying, trading, holding, selling. Wish you the best of luck in the markets, and again, hit up that subscribe button. Appreciate the time. Have a good one. Rob from Crypto Bobby, signing out. Peace.